Hi, I'm Michael Chen. My father once said something that shattered everything I thought I knew about family loyalty. You're a disgrace to the Chen name. All that potential, wasted on shuffling papers like some common clerk. He said it in front of the entire family at my sister's engagement party, his voice cutting through the restaurant's warm ambiance like a blade. What he didn't know was that 3 hours later, I'd receive a call that would change everything, a call that would make him realize just how wrong he'd been about his disappointment of a son. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Golden Dragon restaurant buzzed with celebration that Saturday evening in March. Red lanterns swayed gently from the ceiling, casting warm shadows across the mahogany tables where 3 generations of the Chen family had gathered to celebrate Jessica's engagement to Thomas Hayes. The air was thick with the aroma of Peking duck and jasmine tea, but all I could taste was the bitter sting of humiliation. I sat at the corner table picking at my sweet and sour pork, while my father held court at the head of the main table. Robert Chen, successful businessman, pillar of the Riverside Chinese-American community, and master of making his middle child feel like a cosmic mistake. His voice boomed across the private dining room as he regaled the assembled relatives with stories of Jessica's latest legal victory and her fiancé's recent promotion to senior partner at his investment firm. And Thomas just closed a $50 million deal with those tech companies in Silicon Valley, my father announced, raising his glass of red wine. Jessica picked a winner, just like I always knew she would. Thomas Hayes beamed, his perfectly styled blonde hair catching the light as he squeezed my sister's hand. Everything about him screamed success, from his Italian leather shoes to his Rolex Submariner. He was everything my father wanted in a son, and everything I apparently was. What about Michael? Aunt Grace asked from across the room, her voice carrying that forced cheerfulness that family members use when they're trying to include the black sheep. How's work going, honey? The question hung in the air like incense smoke. I felt every eye in the room turn toward me, and I knew what was coming. The same conversation we'd been having for the past 2 years, ever since I'd taken what everyone believed was a dead-end job at the Riverside County Records Office. Oh, Michael's still doing filing, my father said, the word dripping with disdain. Very important work, organizing birth certificates and marriage licenses. A few of the younger cousins snickered. My mother, Linda, shot them a warning look, but said nothing to defend me. She never did. In our family, keeping peace meant staying silent, and Linda Chen was a master of strategic silence. Actually, it's a bit more complex than that, I said quietly, knowing it was futile but unable to stop myself. I work with municipal records, and records, my father interrupted, his voice rising slightly. You have a degree from UC Berkeley, Michael. You could have been anything. Doctor, lawyer, engineer. Instead, you chose to become a glorified secretary. The words hit like physical blows. I felt my jaw tighten, my hands clench under the table. What I wanted to say was that my Berkeley degree in international relations had been specifically chosen for my career path, that my filing job was actually a cover for classified work that required someone with my particular skill set, that the mundane records office was the perfect front for activities that would make Thomas's million-dollar deals look like playground negotiations. What I actually said was, "It's stable work, Dad. Good benefits." The disappointment in his eyes was worse than his anger. Stable, good benefit. Listen to yourself, Michael. You sound like someone who's given up on life. Jessica leaned forward, her diamond engagement ring catching the light. Michael, I could get you an interview at my firm. We need paralegals, and it pays 3 times what you're making now. Thanks, but I'm good where I am, I replied, taking a sip of my tea to buy time. The truth was, I made more in 1 month than Jessica made in 3. But explaining that would require revealing things that were above her security clearance. Good where you are, my father repeated, shaking his head. 32 years old, living in that tiny apartment, driving a car that's older than some of the interns at my restaurant. This is what you call good. Thomas cleared his throat, sensing an opportunity to shine. You know, Michael, there's real money in government contracting. My firm works with several federal agencies, defense contracts, intelligence consulting. That's where the real action is. If only any of them knew that I'd spent the last 18 months working on projects that would make his intelligence consulting look like a high school research paper. But all I could do was nod and say, "That sounds interesting." Interesting. My father scoffed. Everything's just interesting to you, isn't it, Michael? Never exciting, never ambitious, just interesting. The worst part was watching my mother's face during these exchanges. Linda Chen had immigrated from Taiwan with nothing but dreams for her children's success. She'd worked 16-hour days in the restaurant's kitchen, saving every penny for our education, and now, watching her disappointment as her middle child apparently squandered everything she'd sacrificed for was almost unbearable. "Maybe it's time to think about going back to school," she said softly, her voice barely audible above the restaurant's ambient noise. "Get your MBA," like Jessica suggested. "Mom, I'm fine. Really, fine," my father said, and I could hear the decades of frustration in that single word. "You know what fine is, Michael? Fine is what people say when they've stopped trying. Fine is what people say when they've accepted mediocrity." The restaurant suddenly felt suffocating. The red walls seemed to close in, and the celebratory chatter of my extended family became a distant buzz. I excused myself and walked to the bathroom, needing a moment to collect myself before I said something I'd regret. In the mirror I saw a man who looked older than his 32 years. The stress of maintaining two separate lives was taking its toll. My colleagues at the records office knew me as quiet, dependable Michael Chen, who processed documents with meticulous attention to detail. My family knew me as the disappointment who'd chosen comfort over ambition. Neither group knew about the late-night briefings, the encrypted communications, or the work that kept me awake at night, not because it was boring, but because the stakes were higher than anyone in that restaurant could imagine. I splashed cold water on my face and returned to the table, determined to get through the rest of the evening without incident. But as I sat down, I caught the tail end of a conversation between Thomas and my father. "Waste of potential," Thomas was saying, glancing in my direction. "Some people just aren't cut out for anything more than pushing papers." "I keep thinking he'll snap out of it," my father replied. "Find some ambition, some drive. But every year he gets more comfortable with being average." Average. The word stung more than it should have. In my real work, average meant people died. Average meant national security compromised. Average meant failure on a scale that would keep me awake for weeks. But here in this restaurant surrounded by people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, average was apparently all I'd ever be. The party continued around me, but I felt increasingly disconnected from it. Jessica and Thomas discussed their wedding plans, their honeymoon in the Maldives, their future children who would undoubtedly be as successful as their parents. My cousins talked about their promotions, their stock options, their latest real estate investments, and I sat there, the family disappointment, nursing my tea and counting the minutes until I could politely escape. When the fortune cookies arrived, even fate seemed to mock me. My fortune read, "Your hidden talents will soon be revealed." I crumpled it up and shoved it in my pocket, wondering if whoever wrote these things had a sense of irony. "What did yours say?" Jessica asked, cracking open her own cookie. "Something about patience." I lied. As the evening wound down, family members began saying their goodbyes. There were hugs, promises to get together soon, and the usual comments about how quickly the children were growing up. My father shook Thomas's hand with the kind of respect he'd never shown me, and my mother fussed over Jessica's ring, already planning the wedding reception. "Michael," my father called as I was putting on my jacket. "Walk me to the car." I followed him outside into the cool March evening. The parking lot was nearly empty, and the silence between us felt heavy with unspoken words. He stopped beside his BMW, a car that cost more than most people's annual salary, and turned to face me. "I don't understand you," he said finally. "I've given you every opportunity, every advantage. Your mother and I worked ourselves to the bone so you could have choices we never had, and this is what you choose. Dad, you're a disgrace to the Chen name, he said, his voice quiet but firm. All that potential wasted on shuffling papers like some common clerk. Your sister's about to marry a man who makes more in a month than you make in a year. Your cousins are buying houses, starting families, building something meaningful with their lives, and you're content to be invisible. The words hit like a physical blow. I wanted to tell him about the commendations locked in a safe deposit box, about the operations that had saved lives, about the trust that had been placed in me by people whose names he'd recognize if he saw them on the news. Instead, I said nothing, because that's what the job required: silence. Invisibility, the very things he was using to cut me down. I'm disappointed in you, Michael, he continued, more disappointed than I've ever been in anyone, but mostly, I'm disappointed in myself for believing you'd ever amount to anything more than this. He got in his car and drove away, leaving me standing alone in the parking lot, under the flickering streetlight. I stood there for a long time, listening to the distant hum of traffic and feeling the weight of his words settle into my chest like stone. The drive home to my apartment was a blur of empty streets and red lights. I lived in a converted warehouse in downtown Riverside, the kind of place that looked industrial from the outside, but had been transformed into modern loft-style apartment. It was small, as my father had pointed out, but it was mine. More importantly, it was secure, with reinforced locks and a security system that would make most banks envious. I climbed the stairs to my second-floor unit, fumbling with my keys in the dim hallway light. The apartment was dark when I entered, lit only by the glow of the city lights filtering through the large windows. I didn't bother turning on the lights. Instead, I walked to the kitchen and opened a beer, then stood at the window looking out at the quiet street below. This was my life. This was what I'd chosen, or what had been chosen for me: a life of shadows and secrets, of family dinners where I was the failure, of maintaining a cover so deep that even the people who loved me couldn't see the truth. The irony wasn't lost on me, that the very skills that made me valuable to my country made me worthless in my father's eyes. I thought about Emma Thompson, the woman I'd been seeing for the past 6 months. She worked at the local library, and like everyone else, she believed I was just a records clerk. We'd met at Morning Brew, the coffee shop where I spent most of my free time, and she'd been charmed by what she saw as my quiet, unassuming nature. She had no idea that my quiet nature was actually hypervigilance, trained into me through years of operations, where noticing the wrong detail could mean the difference between life and death. Emma had been asking recently about meeting my family, about getting more serious. How could I explain that my family saw me as a loser, that any serious relationship would require security clearances and background checks that would take months to process? How could I tell her that the man she thought she was falling in love with was in many ways a carefully constructed fiction? My phone buzzed on the counter, pulling me from my thoughts. A text from Jessica. "Thanks for coming tonight. I know Dad was hard on you, but he means well." Maybe think about what he said. I stared at the message for a long time before deleting it without responding. What was I supposed to say? That I'd already thought about it, that I'd been thinking about it for 2 years every single day, that the choice between my real life and my cover life was slowly eating me alive. Another text, this one from my mother. "You forgot your fortune cookie. I saved it for you." I pulled the crumpled fortune from my pocket and smoothed it out on the counter. "Your hidden talents will soon be revealed." The words seemed to mock me in the dim light of my apartment. Hidden talents, if only she knew. I finished my beer and was about to head to bed when my secure phone rang. Not my regular phone, the one family and friends called. My other phone, the one that only a handful of people in the world had the number to. I glanced at the clock. 11:47 p.m. Late night calls on the secure line were never good news. "Chen," I answered, my voice automatically shifting to the professional tone I used for work. "Michael, it's Sarah Martinez. I need you to come in. Now." Director Martinez, the head of the CIA's Special Activities Division, and one of the most respected intelligence professionals in the country. She was calling my secure line at midnight on a Saturday, which meant something significant was happening. "What's the situation?" I asked, already moving toward my bedroom to change clothes. "I can't discuss it over the phone. How quickly can you get to the federal building?" I calculated the drive time, 20 minutes. "Make it 15, this is priority one, Michael, and bring your go bag." The line went dead. I stood there for a moment, staring at the phone. Priority one meant imminent threat to national security. Go bag meant I might not be coming home for a while. I thought about the fortune cookie fortune lying on my kitchen counter, about my father's disappointed face, about Emma's questions about meeting my family. Then I pushed all of that aside and did what I'd been trained to do. I became someone else entirely. The Michael Chen, who processed municipal records, ceased to exist as I pulled on black tactical pants and a plain gray shirt. The Michael Chen, who disappointed his family at dinner parties, faded away as I checked my weapons and secured my identification. In his place stood someone my father would never recognize, a man who had served his country in ways that would never be publicly acknowledged, whose paperwork job was actually a cover for operations that protected everything Robert Chen held dear. I grabbed my go bag from the bedroom closet, a black duffel that contained everything I might need for extended operations, additional identification, cash in multiple currencies, secure communication devices, and personal items that couldn't be traced back to my civilian identity. It was packed and ready at all times. Because this was the nature of the work, you were always on call, always ready to disappear into whatever identity the mission required. The drive to the federal building took exactly 14 minutes. The streets were empty except for the occasional late-night wanderer, and I made it through downtown Riverside without hitting a single red light. The federal building loomed against the night sky, its windows dark except for the security lighting that cast long shadows across the entrance. I parked in the underground garage and used my keycard to access the elevator that would take me to the floors that didn't officially exist. The elevator rose silently, stopping at a level that wasn't marked on any building directory. When the doors opened, I stepped into a world that was the complete opposite of the mundane records office where I spent my days. The hallway was sterile, lined with unmarked doors that led to offices and briefing rooms, where America's most sensitive operations were planned and executed. My footsteps echoed on the polished floor as I walked toward the briefing room where Director Martinez was waiting. She was standing at the head of a conference table, studying a series of documents spread across its surface. Sarah Martinez was a woman in her 50s, with gray streaked hair and the kind of sharp intelligence that made her both respected and feared in equal measure. She'd been running covert operations since before I was born, and she had a reputation for seeing 3 moves ahead of everyone else. "Michael," she said, looking up as I entered. "Thank you for coming so quickly." "What's the situation, Director?" She gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit down. What I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest level. As of tonight, you're being reactivated for a special assignment." Reactivated. The word sent a chill down my spine. My last active assignment had been 2 years ago, a counterintelligence operation that had ended with me transitioning to my current cover identity. I'd been told it was a long-term assignment, that I might be in this role for years. Something major must have happened to pull me back into active duty. "I thought I was on extended cover assignment," I said. "You were. But situations change." She picked up a file from the table and slid it across to me. 3 days ago, we intercepted communications suggesting that a foreign intelligence service has identified several of our deep cover operatives. Your name was on the list." I opened the file and scanned the content. Code names, locations, operational details. My civilian identity was compromised, which meant Michael Chen, records clerk, was now a liability, but it also meant Michael Chen, intelligence operative, was about to resurface. "How bad is it?" I asked. "Bad enough that we're pulling you out of cover. Your family thinks you're a failure, Michael, but that's about to change dramatically. We need you for something that requires your full skill set, not the watered-down version you've been using at the records office." She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city light. Tell me something, Michael. Are you ready to stop being invisible? I thought about my father's words, about the disappointment in my family's eyes, about the fortune cookie fortune that was probably still sitting on my kitchen counter. What's the assignment? Tomorrow morning, you're going to receive a call, in front of whoever happens to be around. The caller will address you by your former military rank, and inform you that your services are required for a matter of national security. Your cover is over, Michael. Time to come home. I felt something shift inside me, like a lock clicking open after being closed for years. And my family, they'll find out who you really are, all of them. Your father, your mother, your sister, everyone who thought you were wasting your potential pushing paper. She turned back to me, and I saw something that might have been sympathy in her eyes. I read your psychological evaluations, Michael. I know what this cover assignment has cost you personally, but I also know that you're one of the best operatives we've ever had. It's time to stop hiding. The briefing lasted another hour. Details about the new assignment, security protocols, operational timelines, but all I could think about was the look on my father's face when he realized that his disappointment of a son was actually something he'd never imagined. The irony was almost too perfect to believe. When I finally left the federal building, the sun was beginning to rise over Riverside. I drove home through empty streets, past the coffee shop where I'd met Emma, past the restaurant where my family had gathered just hours before to celebrate Jessica's engagement. Everything looked the same, but I knew that by this time tomorrow, nothing would ever be the same again. I parked outside my apartment building and sat in the car for a moment, watching the city wake up around me. Soon Michael Chen, the records clerk, would cease to exist, and in his place would stand someone my family had never really known, someone who had served his country with distinction, who had protected American interests in ways that would never be publicly acknowledged, who had chosen duty over recognition and service over success. The fortune cookie fortune was still on my kitchen counter when I walked into the apartment. I picked it up and read it again. Your hidden talents will soon be revealed. For the first time in 2 years, I smiled. I slept fitfully for 3 hours before my alarm jolted me awake at 7 in the morning. The conversation with Director Martinez felt surreal in the pale morning light, filtering through my apartment windows. Had it really happened? Was my cover really about to be blown after 2 years of careful construction? My regular phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Good morning. Coffee at Morning Brew later. I want to hear about your sister's party. I stared at the message, realizing this might be one of the last normal interactions I'd have for a while. Everything was about to change, and Emma, sweet Emma, who thought she was dating a boring government clerk, was about to discover that the man she'd been seeing was someone entirely different. I texted back, rain check, work emergency came up. It wasn't entirely a lie.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Work emergencies were about to consume my life in ways she couldn't imagine. The Riverside County Records Office was housed in a bland 3-story building downtown, the kind of place people drove past without a second glance. Perfect cover for someone who needed to disappear into bureaucratic anonymity. I'd spent 2 years perfecting the persona of Michael Chen, diligent but unremarkable employee, the kind of person who processed forms efficiently and never drew attention to himself. My cubicle was on the 2nd floor, surrounded by filing cabinets and the constant hum of fluorescent lights. David Park, my desk neighbor, was already at his computer when I arrived, pecking away at his keyboard with the dedication of someone who genuinely believed municipal record-keeping was his calling in life. You look tired, David observed as I settled into my chair. Late night. Family dinner, I replied, powering up my computer. My sister got engaged. That's nice. My sister's getting divorced. 3rd time. David shook his head. Some people never learn. I went through the motions of my regular workday, processing marriage licenses and business permits, while part of my mind remained focused on Director Martinez's words. When would the call come? How would it happen? I found myself checking my phone every few minutes, waiting for the moment that would shatter my carefully constructed life. Around 10:30, My supervisor, Margaret Walsh, stopped by my desk. Margaret was a woman in her early 60s who'd been working in municipal government since the Carter administration. She had the weary efficiency of someone who'd seen every possible bureaucratic disaster and lived to file the paperwork. "Michael, I need you to take these property transfer documents to the courthouse," she said, handing me a manila folder. "The clerk there is expecting them by noon." "Of course," I said, grateful for the distraction. The courthouse was a 15-minute walk through downtown Riverside, past the coffee shops and small businesses that made up the heart of the city. As I walked, I found myself studying faces, noting exit routes, cataloging potential threats, old habits from my operational days that I'd never quite shaken, even in my cover life. The courthouse was busy with the usual Monday morning crowd, lawyers rushing between hearings, citizens paying traffic fines, the steady flow of people whose lives intersected with the legal system in small but significant ways. I delivered the documents to the clerk's office and was heading back to my building when my phone rang. Not my regular phone, my secure phone. I ducked into an alley between two buildings and answered. "Chen, Michael, it's Rodriguez." Colonel James Rodriguez, my former commanding officer from my Special Forces days. We'd served together in 3 different operations, and he was one of the few people who knew both my military record and my current assignment. Hearing his voice made my pulse quicken. "Colonel, what's the status?" "The timelines moved up. The call is coming in 20 minutes. Are you somewhere public?" I checked my watch, 11:40 a.m. "I'm about to head back to my office." "Perfect. Make sure you're at your desk, around your coworkers. The more witnesses, the better for the cover story." "Understood." "Michael?" Rodriguez's voice softened slightly. "You've done good work these past 2 years. I know it hasn't been easy." The line went dead. I stood in the alley for a moment, watching office workers hurry past the entrance, oblivious to the conversation that had just taken place. In 20 minutes, my life was going to change forever. The question was whether I was ready for it. I walked back to the records office, slowly, savoring what might be my last few minutes as an anonymous bureaucrat. The security guard, an elderly man named Frank, who always asked about my weekend, waved as I passed through the lobby. The elevator carried me up to the 2nd floor, where the familiar sounds of ringing phones and keyboard clicking created a soundtrack of mundane efficiency. David was eating an early lunch at his desk, a sandwich from the deli down the street. "How was the courthouse?" he asked. "Exciting as always," I replied, settling back into my chair. My hands were steady, but I could feel adrenaline beginning to course through my system. Whatever was about to happen, it would be public, witnessed by people who'd known me as quiet, unremarkable Michael Chen for 2 years. Margaret emerged from her office carrying a stack of files. "Michael, when you're done with those property assessments, I need you to help David with the business license backlog." "No problem," I said, keeping my voice neutral. 17 minutes, the phone on my desk rang at exactly noon. Not my cell phone, not my secure phone, but the office landline that rarely rang, except for citizens calling about records requests. I glanced around the office. David was still at his desk, Margaret was visible through her open door, and 3 other clerks were within earshot. Perfect audio. "Riverside County Records, this is Michael Chen," I answered in my usual professional tone. "General Chen." The voice was crisp, authoritative, with the unmistakable cadence of military command. "This is Director Sarah Martinez, Central Intelligence Agency." The words hung in the air like a bomb that hadn't exploded yet. I felt every muscle in my body tense, but kept my voice steady. "I'm sorry, I think you have the wrong number. This is the records office." "Negative, General. We have the right number. Your country needs you so effective immediately. You're being recalled to active duty for a matter of national security. A car will be at your location in 15 minutes. David's sandwich stopped halfway to his mouth. Margaret had frozen in her doorway, files clutched to her chest. The typing from the other cubicles had stopped, and I could feel eyes turning toward my desk. "I think there's been some mistake," I said, maintaining the confused tone of a clerk receiving a bizarre phone call. "I work in municipal records. I'm not military. General Chen, we don't have time for cover protocols. Operation Nightfall is compromised, and we need your expertise immediately. Your service record speaks for itself. Decorated Special Forces officer. 3 tours in classified operations. Recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross. Sir, your country is calling. The silence in the office was deafening. David's mouth was actually hanging open. Margaret looked like she'd seen a ghost. Through the thin cubicle walls I could hear other conversations stopping as word spread that something extraordinary was happening at Michael Chen's desk. I don't understand, I said, though inside I was marveling at Director Martinez's performance. She was selling this perfectly, giving me the reputation and respect that my cover had never allowed. Sir, I'm going to be direct. 3 days ago, we identified a credible threat to American interests that requires immediate action. You're the only operative with the specific skill set and security clearance needed for this mission. I'm formally requesting that you resume your position as Special Operations Commander, effective immediately. David stood up from his chair, moving closer to my desk like he was watching a movie and wanted a better view. Margaret had abandoned all pretense of working and was openly staring. I could hear whispers starting from the other cubicles. Commander, I said, letting confusion and disbelief color my voice. Ma'am, I think you really do have the wrong person. I process marriage licenses. General Chen, I'm going to read you something from your classified service record. There was a pause, the sound of papers rustling. Operation Desert Shield, 2019. You led a team of 8 operatives behind enemy lines to extract a high-value intelligence asset. Mission success, 0 casualties. Commendation for exceptional bravery under fire. Operation Ice Storm, you infiltrated a terrorist cell and prevented an attack on American soil that would have killed thousands of civilians. Operation Silent Thunder, classified, but I can tell you that your actions directly prevented an international incident that could have led to war. The office had gone completely silent. Even the phones had stopped ringing, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Margaret slowly walked over to my desk, her face pale with shock. Ma'am, I said, weakly, I've never heard of any of those operations. Sir, your modesty is admirable, but we're facing a time-sensitive situation. The car will be there in 12 minutes. Please gather any personal items you need. This assignment may require extended deployment. David whispered, and I realized he'd moved close enough to hear both sides of the conversation. General, I'm going to be frank, we've had you under deep cover for 2 years, and I know that maintaining that cover has required personal sacrifice. Your family believes you're underachieving. Your friends think you're wasting your potential, and I'm sure there are days when you've questioned the value of the work you're doing. But sir, you've been protecting this country in ways that most people will never know about, and now we need you to step back into the light. I felt something crack inside my chest. 2 years of disappointment, 2 years of being seen as a failure, 2 years of watching my father's face when he looked at his disappointing son, and now, in front of witnesses, someone was acknowledging what I'd really been doing. I don't know what to say, I managed. Say yes, your country needs you. I looked around the office. David was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. Margaret's files had scattered on the floor. Other employees had abandoned their desks and were clustering around my cubicle, drawn by the impossible conversation they were witnessing. Yes, I said quietly. Yes, ma'am. Outstanding. Your transportation will be there shortly. Welcome back, General. The line went dead. I sat there holding the phone, aware that 20 people were staring at me with expressions ranging from shock to awe to complete bewilderment. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Michael? Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. Was that real? I set the phone down carefully and looked at her. For 2 years Margaret had been my supervisor, assigning me filing tasks and reminding me about dress code policy. She'd known me as a competent but unremarkable employee who never made waves or drew attention. Now she was looking at me like I was a complete stranger. I can't really discuss it, I said, standing up from my chair, but I need to gather my things. You're really military? David asked, his voice filled with disbelief. You're really a general? I opened my desk drawer and removed the few personal items I kept there. A coffee mug, a small framed photo of my family, a paperweight Emma had given me for my birth. Everything else was part of the cover, part of the fiction of Michael Chen, municipal clerk. David, you're a good friend, I said, shaking his hand. Take care of yourself, but you're coming back, right? This is just temporary? I looked at him, this decent man who'd shared coffee breaks and weekend stories with me for 2 years, who'd never suspected that the quiet guy in the next cubicle had a classified past that would make action movies look tame. I don't know, I said, honest. Margaret was still standing there, files scattered around her feet, when I turned to leave. Michael, wait, I don't understand any of this. You've been here for 2 years, you process forms, you're normal. Sometimes normal is the best disguise, I said gently. Word had spread through the entire office by now. Employees from other floors had come up to see the clerk who'd apparently been living a double life. I could hear whispers following me as I walked toward the elevator. General, Special Forces, the story was already growing in the telling, becoming more dramatic with each retelling. The elevator doors closed on a scene of complete chaos. Phones were ringing as people called friends and family to share the unbelievable story. Margaret was trying to restore order while simultaneously fielding questions she couldn't answer. David was standing by my empty cubicle, staring at the chair where he'd thought he'd known the person who sat there. I rode down to the lobby, watching the floors tick by, knowing that I was descending not just through a building, but through the layers of a life I was leaving behind. Frank, the security guard, looked up as I approached his desk. Leaving early today, Mr. Chen? Something like that, Frank. Take care of yourself. He must have seen something in my expression because his smile faded. You okay, son? I'm good, Frank, better than I've been in a long time. I pushed through the glass doors and stepped onto the sidewalk, where a black sedan was waiting at the curb. The driver was a woman in her 30s wearing a crisp business suit, her hair pulled back in a professional bun. She had the alert posture and watchful eyes of someone from my world, not the civilian world I was leaving behind. General Chen, she said, stepping out of the car. That's me. She opened the rear door. Ma'am sends her compliments, sir. She's looking forward to debriefing you. I slid into the back seat, noting the bulletproof glass and the communication equipment that marked this as something far more sophisticated than an ordinary government vehicle. As we pulled away from the curb, I looked back at the records office building, where people were undoubtedly still trying to process what had just happened. My phone buzzing pulled me from my thoughts. Emma, calling right on schedule. Michael, I just heard the craziest thing. My friend Sarah works at the courthouse, and she said someone from her office heard that there was some kind of military emergency at the records building. Something about a general. I closed my eyes. The ripple effects were starting, spreading out from the office to the community, to everyone who thought they knew Michael Chen, unremarkable clerk. Emma, I need to see you. Can you meet me tonight? There's something I need to explain. Of course. Are you okay? You sound different. If she only knew, I'm fine. Better than fine, actually. But there are some things about me that I haven't been able to tell you. Things that are going to change everything. There was a pause. Michael, you're scaring me a little. Don't be scared. Just be prepared for some surprises. After I hung up, the driver caught my eye in the rearview mirror. If I may say so, sir, it must feel good to stop hiding. I thought about that as we drove through the city, hiding. For 2 years I'd been hiding not just from enemies of the state, but from my own family, from people who cared about me, from anyone who might have seen value in who I really was. I'd been so deep undercover that I'd almost lost track of myself. Yeah, I said finally, it does. The federal building rose ahead of us, its facade hiding the secrets within. In a few minutes, I'd be back in the world where my skills mattered, where my service had meaning, where Michael Chen was someone worth respecting. But first, I had a phone call to make. I pulled out my regular phone and scrolled to my father's number. He'd be at the restaurant now, preparing for the lunch rush, probably still thinking about his disappointing son, who processed paperwork for a living. I hit call, and waited. Michael, his voice was surprised. I rarely called during business hours. Dad, I need to tell you something. Is everything okay? You sound strange. Strange, like Emma. He was picking up on the change in my voice, the confidence that came from finally being able to stop pretending to be less than I. Dad, That job you think is so disappointing, the paperwork job that makes you ashamed of me. Michael, we don't need to discuss this now. It's not what you think it is. It's never been what you think it is. There was silence on the other end. What are you talking about? I can't explain everything over the phone, but Dad, I'm not a failure. I never was. Everything you think you know about what I do, about who I am, it's all been a cover story. A cover story. Michael, what are you saying? The car was pulling into the federal building's underground garage. Soon I'd be in briefings, where national security would prevent me from calling anyone, where the demands of the mission would consume all my attention. This might be my only chance to plant the seed, to prepare him for what was coming. Dad, I'm saying that maybe you should be proud of your son after all. I can't tell you everything right now, but you're going to hear things about me today, things that might surprise you. Michael, you're not making sense. Just remember that I love you, okay? And Dad, that disappointment you've been carrying around about me, you can let it go. I hung up as the car stopped next to the elevator that would take me back to my real life. For 2 years I'd been Michael Chen, failure. In a few hours the world would know about Michael Chen, the man who'd served his country with distinction, who'd protected American lives, in ways that would never be fully disclosed, who'd chosen duty over recognition, and service over success. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped into the world where I belonged. But as the car rose toward the classified floors, I couldn't stop thinking about the conversations that would be happening across Riverside tonight. About David trying to explain to his wife that his quiet coworker was apparently some kind of secret agent. About Margaret attempting to file a report about an employee who'd just been recalled to military service by the CIA. About Frank the security guard wondering how he'd missed the signs that the polite young man he'd chatted with every morning was someone extraordinary. And somewhere across town, in a successful restaurant kitchen, my father would be trying to process a phone call that didn't make sense, wondering what his disappointing son had meant about cover stories and pride. By tonight, when the story hit the local news, he'd begin to understand. The elevator stopped, and the doors opened onto the hallway where Director Martinez was waiting. She smiled as I stepped out, and for the first time in 2 years I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. "Welcome home, General," she said. Home, finally. The briefing room on the 7th floor was stark and windowless, lit by harsh fluorescent lights that cast everything in sharp relief. Director Martinez sat across from me at a polished steel table, several file folders arranged between us like a barrier. The transformation from my civilian clothes to tactical gear had taken 15 minutes, but it felt like stepping through a portal between 2 different lives. "The situation is more complex than I indicated last night," Martinez began, opening the first folder. "We've identified a sleeper cell operating in Southern California. They've been here for 18 months. Completely off our radar until 3 days ago." She slid a series of photographs across the table. Surveillance shots of ordinary-looking people going about ordinary activities, a woman at a grocery store, a man getting coffee, another man walking a dog. They could have been my neighbors, people I passed on the street every day during my cover life. "How did we find them?" I asked, studying the images. One of them got sloppy, started using an old communication protocol we'd been monitoring for different reasons. When our analyst ran the patterns, they realized we weren't looking at isolated chat. "This is a coordinated network and they're planning something significant." The second folder contained technical specifications I recognized immediately. Bomb-making materials, chemical compounds, timing devices, the kind of shopping list that kept intelligence professionals awake at night. "Timeline?" I asked. "Best guess. 7 to 10 days, maybe less." Martinez leaned back in her chair, her expression grim. "Here's where it gets personal, Michael. They know about you." I felt my blood cool. "How much do they know?" "Enough to be dangerous. Your civilian identity, your address, your daily routines. They've been watching you for at least 2 weeks." She opened the third folder, revealing surveillance photos of myself. Pictures of me leaving my apartment, walking to work, sitting in morning brew, with The violation felt physical, like discovering someone had been going through my personal belongings. "They know I'm intelligence?" "We don't think so." If they did, you'd already be dead, but they know you're not really a records clerk. Our assessment is that they've identified you as some kind of government asset, but haven't determined your specific role or capabilities. I studied the photos again, noting the angles and distances. Professional work, but not perfect. If I'd been more alert, less focused on maintaining my cover, I might have spotted the surveillance. What's their end game? I asked. That's what we need you to find out. Michael, you're uniquely positioned for this operation. You know the area, you have established patterns, and most importantly, they think they understand you. That gives us an advantage. Martinez stood and walked to a wall-mounted display screen. With a few keystrokes, she brought up a map of Riverside and the surrounding area, marked with red dots, indicating known and suspected cell member locations. The plan is elegant in its simplicity, she continued. You're going to let them take you. I raised an eyebrow. Come again. Tonight you're going to follow your normal routine. Dinner at that Italian place you frequent. Maybe a stop at the bookstore afterward. Predictable Michael Chen behavior. Except tonight you're going to make it easy for them to approach you. She clicked to the next slide, showing detailed floor plans of several buildings. We've identified 3 likely scenarios for how they'll make contact: recruitment approach, intimidation play, or direct kidnapping. In each case you'll be wired and tracked, with backup teams positioned at strategic intervals, and if they just decide to put a bullet in my head, that's why we're pulling you from cover now instead of waiting. As of this morning, Michael Chen, the records clerk, is a missing person, a very high-profile missing person, whose disappearance is being investigated by federal authorities. Martinez returned to her seat and pulled out a tablet, scrolling through what appeared to be news articles. By tonight, every major news outlet in California will be running stories about the government employee who was mysteriously recalled to military service, the man whose co-workers had no idea they'd been working alongside a decorated Special Forces officer. She turned the tablet toward me, and I saw my own face staring back from a CNN homepage. The headline read, "Local clerk revealed as military hero in dramatic workplace call." Below it was a smaller story. Family claims no knowledge of son's secret military career. They made this public? I asked, scrolling through the article. We had to. If you disappear tonight, it needs to look like a kidnapping, not like you went underground. Voluntary, public sympathy, media attention, federal investigation. It forces their hand and limits their options. I continued reading. The article interviewed David from my office, who was quoted as saying, he was just Michael. Quiet, polite, good at his job. None of us suspected anything like this. Margaret had declined to comment, but the reporter noted that the records office was in chaos, following the revelation. Further down, there was a quote that made my stomach tighten. Mr. Chen's father, Robert Chen, owner of the Golden Dragon restaurant chain, expressed shock at the news. My son has always been very private about his work, the elder Chen said. We're proud of his service, but this has been overwhelming for our family. Proud of his service. 24 hours ago my father had called me a disgrace. Now he was telling reporters he was proud, because suddenly the story made sense to him. The disappointment had been replaced by confusion, but at least it wasn't shame anymore. How are they handling it? I asked. Your family? About as well as you'd expect. Your sister's been fielding calls from reporters all morning. Your mother is apparently hiding in the restaurant kitchen too overwhelmed to talk to anyone. And your father, Martinez paused. Let's just say he's been making some calls, trying to verify the story. What kind of call? He contacted 3 different military offices and 2 congressional representatives, demanding to know if his son was really a general. It took some creative maneuvering to give him confirmation without revealing classified details. I set the tablet down, trying to process the implication. My carefully constructed cover wasn't just blown, it had exploded in the most public way possible. There would be no going back to the quiet life of Michael Chen, records clerk. Whatever happened with this operation, that identity was dead forever. There's something else, Martinez said softly. Emma Thompson. My pulse quickened. What about her? She's been trying to reach you all day. Calls, texts, even showed up at your apartment building. She's concerned. Martinez slid another tablet across the table, this one showing a series of text messages from Emma's phone. The progression told a story of growing worry and confusion. Michael, call me back. People are saying crazy things about you. I saw the news. This can't be real. Please just call me. I'm at your apartment. Where are you? I'm scared. Michael, I don't understand what's happening. Are you okay? Are you safe? Please don't shut me out. Whatever this is, we can figure it out together. The last message was timestamped 20 minutes ago. I love you. Just come home. I stared at that final text for a long time. Emma, who thought she was in love with a boring government clerk, was now discovering that everything she believed about me had been a lie, and instead of running away from the confusion and danger, she was trying to find me, trying to help. She can't be part of this operation, I said firmly. She already is. The cell has been watching you, Michael. That means they've been watching her too. She's a vulnerability they might try to exploit, or an asset they might try to use against you. Martinez brought up another series of surveillance photos, these showing Emma at the library where she worked, Emma at the coffee shop where we'd met, Emma walking to her car after leaving my apartment building this morning. Someone had been documenting her movements just as thoroughly as they'd been documenting mine. We've had a protection detail on her since this morning, Martinez continued. She doesn't know it, but she's being watched by our people as well as theirs. If this goes sideways tonight, she'll be safe. And if it doesn't go sideways, what happens to her after the operation? Martinez was quiet for a moment, and I could see the calculation in her eyes. Emma was a civilian who'd stumbled into a classified world through no fault of her own. There were protocols for this situation, procedures designed to protect both national security and innocent bystanders. That depends on a lot of factors, she said finally. How much she learns, how much she can be trusted to keep quiet, how much of a security risk the relationship poses going forward. The implication was clear. My relationship with Emma, built on a foundation of deception and maintained through careful compartmentalization, might not survive the truth. The classified nature of my real work meant that anyone close to me became a potential security concern, subject to background checks and monitoring that most people would find intolerable. There's one more thing, Martinez said, and something in her tone made me look up sharp. We think they might try to use your family as leverage. She opened the final folder, revealing surveillance photos of the Golden Dragon restaurant, pictures of my father arriving for work, my mother in the parking lot, Jessica and Thomas having lunch at one of the corner tables. The cell had been watching all of them, learning their routines, identifying pressure points. How serious is the threat? I asked. Serious enough that we've placed protective surveillance on all of them. But Michael, you need to understand something. If this operation goes bad, if they realize you're not who they think you are, your family becomes their most obvious target for retaliation. I felt the weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders like a familiar burden. For 2 years, my cover had been designed to protect not just my identity but everyone I cared about. Now that protection was gone, and the people I loved were exposed because of choices I'd made in service to my country. What's the backup plan if they take the family instead of me? There isn't one. That's why this has to work, Michael. You have to let them take you, and you have to get inside their operation before they realize what's happening. Martinez closed the folders and leaned back in her chair. I'm not going to lie to you. This is as dangerous as anything you've ever done. You'll be alone behind enemy lines, with no backup and no extraction plan, until you can identify their target and timeline. If they discover who you really are, she didn't need to finish the sentence. We both knew what happened to intelligence operatives who were captured by terrorist cells. The lucky ones died quickly. When do I start? I asked. 6 hours. That gives us time for final preparations and equipment checks. Martinez stood, signaling the end of the briefing. Michael, I need to ask you something, and I need a completely honest answer. Are you ready for this? Mentally, emotionally, operationally? I thought about the question, running through my own assessment. 2 years of cover work had kept my skills sharp, but had also created emotional complications that didn't exist in my previous assignments. I had people to protect now, people whose safety depended on my performance. The stakes felt higher than they'd ever been. I'm ready, I said. Good. Report to equipment in 30 minutes. They'll get you fitted with surveillance gear and communication devices. After that, you'll have 2 hours for personal preparation." She paused at the door. "Michael, your father called the main CIA switchboard this morning, 3 times. He told the operator that he needed to speak to someone about his son, that there had been some kind of mistake, that Michael couldn't possibly be the person described in the news reports." "What did you tell him?" "Nothing, but the fact that he called at all tells me something important. Whatever he said to you at that restaurant, whatever disappointment he expressed, it came from a place of love. He's not ashamed of you, Michael. He's terrified for you." After Martinez left, I sat alone in the briefing room for several minutes, staring at the surveillance photos spread across the table, pictures of my life from the outside, taken by people who meant to do me harm. It was unsettling to see myself through their eyes. A target, an asset, a problem to be solved. My phone buzzed. Another text from Emma. "The reporters are gone from your building. I'm going to wait for you, however long it takes." I typed back, "Don't wait. This is going to get complicated." Her response came immediately. "I don't care how complicated it gets. I care about you." I stared at those words for a long time. Emma Thompson, small-town librarian, was choosing to stand by someone she'd just discovered was a complete stranger. Someone whose real life was dangerous enough to attract federal protection details and international terrorist surveillance. She was choosing loyalty over safety, love over logic. It reminded me of something my grandfather had told me when I was young, something about the difference between people who run toward danger and people who run away from it. Emma was running toward danger, for me, without fully understanding what that danger entailed. Equipment fitting took 90 minutes. Microtransmitters disguised as shirt buttons, a GPS tracking device built into my belt buckle, emergency communication gear hidden in my wallet. The technicians worked with practiced efficiency, testing each device and explaining backup protocols in case the primary systems fail. "Remember," the senior technician said as he made final adjustments to my jacket, "these devices are designed to be undetectable under normal circumstances, but if they conduct a thorough search, they'll find them. The key is to avoid giving them reason to search." "How much transmission range do I have?" 2 miles in urban terrain, 5 miles in open country. "But Michael, once you're inside their operation, assume all electronic communication is compromised. Trust your training, not the technology." With the equipment checks complete, I had 2 hours for personal preparation. I used the first hour to review everything we knew about the cell members, memorizing faces and known associates. The second hour I spent in the federal building's secure communications center, making calls that might be my last chance to contact the people who mattered. I called Emma first. She answered on the first ring. "Michael, thank God. Are you okay? Where are you?" "I'm safe, Em, but I need to tell you some things, and I need you to listen without interrupting." "Okay, everything you think you know about me is true, but it's not complete. I really did work at the records office, but that wasn't my real job. It was a cover for other work I can't fully explain." There was silence on the other end, and I could imagine her trying to process this information. "The person you've been dating for the past 6 months is real," I continued. "My feelings for you are real, but there are parts of my life that I've never been able to share with you, parts that are going to put you in danger just by association." "I don't care about danger, Michael. I care about you. You should care about danger. There are people who want to hurt me, and they might try to use you to do it. There are going to be federal agents watching you for the next few days, maybe longer." "Federal agents?" "Emma, I need you to promise me something. If anyone approaches you, anyone you don't know who asks questions about me, you call the number I'm about to give you immediately. Don't try to handle it yourself. Don't try to protect me. Just call." I gave her the emergency contact number for Martinez's office, making her repeat it back twice to ensure she had it memorized. "Michael, you're scaring me." "Good, you should be scared. But Emma, I need you to know that whatever happens in the next few days, whatever you hear about me on the news or from other people, the man you fell in love with is real. He's just more complicated than you knew. Are you coming back?" The question hung between us like a bridge I wasn't sure I could cross. Honest answer? I didn't know if I was coming back. The operation I was about to undertake had failure rates that would terrify most people, but Emma deserved something better than uncertain. "I'm going to try," I said finally, But if I don't, I want you to know that these past 6 months have been the happiest of my life. You made me remember who I was underneath all the other identities. Don't talk like that. You're coming back. You're coming back, and we're going to figure this out together. After I hung up with Emma, I called my parents. My mother answered, her voice shaky with exhaustion. Michael? Oh, thank God. We've been so worried. There are reporters calling. People asking questions we don't know how to answer. Mom, put Dad on the phone too. I need to talk to both of you. There was a moment of muffled conversation. Then my father's voice. Michael, what the hell is going on? I don't understand any of this. Dad, remember what you said to me at the restaurant about being disappointed in me. Son, if this is all true, if you've really been serving your country, then I owe you an apology. A big one. You don't owe me anything, Dad, but I need you both to understand something. The work I do, it's dangerous. And sometimes that danger extends to people I care about. What kind of danger? My mother asked, her voice tight with worry. The kind where federal agents are going to watching the restaurant for the next few days. The kind where you need to be extra careful about who you talk to and where you go. Michael, my father said, and his voice had changed, taken on the authoritative tone he used when dealing with serious business matters. Are you in trouble? Do you need help? Money, lawyers, whatever you need. The offer surprised me. 24 hours ago, this man had called me a disgrace. Now he was offering whatever support I needed. No questions asked. It was a reminder that family loyalty could be complicated, that disappointment and love could coexist in the same heart. I don't need money, Dad. I need you to trust me, and I need you to be careful. Both of you. We trust you, son, my mother said softly. We always have. As I prepared to leave the federal building and begin the most dangerous mission of my career, I carried those words with me. Trust, from a woman who thought she was dating a boring clerk, from parents who'd just discovered their disappointing son was someone they'd never imagined. For the first time in 2 years, I felt like Michael Chen, the real Michael Chen, was going home. The sun was setting over Riverside as I walked down Main Street, maintaining the casual pace of someone heading to dinner without a care in the world. Tony's Italian kitchen was 3 blocks away, and I could already smell the garlic and oregano drifting from its exhaust vent. It was Tuesday night, exactly the kind of evening when the old Michael Chen would have grabbed a quiet table in the back, ordered the chicken parmesan, and read a book while he ate. Tonight, I was walking into a trap of my own design. The micro transmitter in my shirt button was broadcasting my location to 3 separate surveillance teams, positioned throughout downtown. Agent Lisa Walker was posing as a jogger 2 blocks behind me. A tactical response unit waited in an unmarked van outside the federal building. And somewhere in the shadows, members of a terrorist cell were watching my every move, preparing to make contact with a man they believed was a low-level government employee with access to sensitive information. I paused at the corner of Main and 5th, checking my reflection in the window of a closed electronics store. The man looking back at me wore the same clothes I'd worn to work for 2 years. Khaki pants, blue button-down shirt, brown leather shoes that had seen better days. Michael Chen, Rickard's clerk, preparing for another solitary dinner. But underneath the familiar exterior, everything had changed. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Table for 1 tonight, Mr. Chen. They were watching. Probably had been for the past several blocks, maybe longer. I typed back, always am. The response came immediately. Perhaps it's time for some company. I continued walking toward the restaurant, my senses hyper-alert to every person on the street, every parked car, every potential threat or escape. 2 years of cover work had required me to suppress these instincts, to appear oblivious and untrained. Now, walking into what was essentially a combat situation, those instincts flooded back with startling intensity. Tony's Italian kitchen occupied the ground floor of a converted warehouse, its red brick facade softened by window boxes full of herbs and flowering plants. Through the large front windows I could see the usual Tuesday night crowd, young couples sharing plates of pasta, a business dinner in progress at the corner table, an elderly man reading a newspaper over his minestrone soup. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that their Tuesday evening was about to become the setting for an intelligence operation. I pushed through the front door, and Tony Marcelli looked up from behind the hostess station with his usual welcoming smile. "Michael, good to see you. Your regular table?" "That would be great, Tony." He led me to a two-top near the back wall, the same table I'd occupied dozens of times over the past 2 years. It offered a clear view of the entrance and two potential exits, the front door and a service corridor that led to the kitchen and the rear alley. Perfect for surveillance, but also perfect for someone planning an ambush. "The usual?" Tony asked, pulling out his order pad. "Actually, let me look at the menu tonight. I'm feeling adventurous." Tony raised an eyebrow. In 2 years I'd ordered the same thing every time: chicken parmesan, side salad with Italian dressing, water with lemon. My sudden interest in variety was completely out of character for the predictable Michael Chen he knew. "Everything okay, Michael? You seem different tonight." Before I could answer, my phone buzzed again. Another text from the unknown number. "Order the lasagna. Extra time to cook, extra time to talk." I looked up at Tony, who was still holding his order pad expectantly. "You know what? I'll have the lasagna." "Excellent choice. Glass of wine with that?" "Just water, thanks." As Tony walked away, I scanned the restaurant more carefully. The young couple at table 6 looked too alert, their conversation too quiet. The businessman in the corner was spending more time watching the room than reading his documents, and the elderly man with the newspaper had been on the same page for the past 5 minutes. Professional surveillance. The question was whether they were all part of the cell, or if some of them belonged to Martinez's backup teams. In this business, it was often impossible to tell the difference between protection and threat until someone started shooting. I pulled out my phone and sent a message to Emma. "Thinking of you tonight." Her response came quickly. "Be safe. I love you." 3 words that carried more weight than she could possibly understand. "I love you." Spoken by someone who'd just discovered that the man she thought she knew was a carefully constructed fiction. Someone who was choosing to trust me despite having every reason to run in the opposite direction. My lasagna arrived 15 minutes later, brought not by Tony but by a server I'd never seen before. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with short blonde hair, and the kind of nervous energy that suggested this wasn't her regular job. She set the plate down carefully, avoiding eye contact. "Enjoy your meal," she said, but there was something in her tone that made me look more closely. As she turned to leave, I saw a small piece of paper tucked under the edge of my water glass. I waited until she was back in the kitchen, before carefully extracting the note. It was written in block letters on plain white paper. "Men's room, 5 minutes. Come alone." Classic approach. Public enough to avoid suspicion, private enough for an unobserved conversation. I took a bite of the lasagna, which was actually quite good, and checked my watch. The microtransmitter would relay my movements to the surveillance teams, but once I entered the restroom, I'd be on my own. 5 minutes later, I stood and walked casually toward the back of the restaurant. The men's room was a single occupancy space, with a lock on the door. Exactly the kind of location where someone could have a quiet conversation, without interruption. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. A man was waiting for me, leaning against the sink with his arms crossed. He was tall and lean, with dark hair, and the kind of weathered face that suggested he'd spent time in harsh climates. His clothes were unremarkable, but his posture was pure military. This wasn't some amateur terrorist recruit. This was a professional operative. "Miss Chen," he said in accented English. "My name is Dmitri. We need to talk." "I think you have me confused with someone else," I replied, staying in character. "I just came in here to use the facilities." Dmitri smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Please, Mr. Chen. We both know you're more than a simple records clerk. The question is how much more." He reached into his jacket and I tensed, ready to react if he pulled a weapon. Instead, he produced a manila envelope, thick with what appeared to be documents and photographs. "We've been watching you for some time," he continued. "Your routines, your contacts, your access to government facilities. You're very careful, very professional, too professional for someone who supposedly files marriage licenses for a living. I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you don't." Dmitri opened the envelope and pulled out a series of surveillance photos, pictures of me entering the federal building, using my keycard to access restricted areas, meeting with people who were clearly intelligence professionals. These were taken over the past 6 months. Mr. Chen, care to explain why a county records clerk has access to federal facilities? The photos were damning, but they also told me something important about Dimitri's operation. The images showed my movements around the building, but not the specific floors I'd accessed or the people I'd met with. They had external surveillance but no inside information. They suspected I was more than I appeared, but they didn't know exactly what. I sometimes deliver documents to other government offices, I said. It's part of my job. At 11 o'clock at night, on weekends, Dimitri shook his head. Mr. Chen, we're not fools, you work for American intelligence. The only question is at what level and with what access. This was the critical moment. How I responded would determine whether Dimitri tried to recruit me, kidnap me, or simply put a bullet in my head. I needed to give him enough truth to be believable while maintaining enough mystery to keep him interested. Okay, I said, letting my shoulders slump slightly. You're right, I'm not just a records clerk. I'm listening. I work for the Department of Homeland Security. Low-level stuff, mostly. I monitor certain databases, flag suspicious activity, file reports that probably nobody reads. It was a plausible cover story significant enough to explain my access to federal facilities, but mundane enough to avoid triggering alarm bells. Dimitri studied my face, looking for signs of deception. What kind of databases? Immigration records, visa applications, border crossings. I look for patterns that might indicate security threats, and you have access to current operational information. Some, depends on the week and what they're tracking. Dimitri nodded slowly, apparently satisfied with my answers. Ms. Chen, my associates and I represent certain interests that are not aligned with your government's policies. We believe that American surveillance and security measures have become excessive, invasive, harmful to innocent people around the world. It was the classic recruitment pitch, appealing to my supposed conscience, while avoiding any explicit mention of terrorism or violence. Dimitri was testing my ideological flexibility, seeing if I could be turned against my own country. I'm not interested in politics, I just do my job and try to stay out of trouble. But surely you've seen things in your work that concern you, innocent people being targeted, families separated, lives destroyed by government paranoia. Sometimes, I admitted, but I'm not in a position to do anything about it. What if you were? What if you could help protect innocent people from unjust persecution? Dimitri was being careful not to ask me directly to commit treason, but the implication was clear. He wanted me to provide information that would help his organization evade American security measures, information that would make it easier for them to carry out whatever attack they were planning. I don't know, I said, injecting uncertainty into my voice. I've never thought about using my position for anything like that. Think about it now, Mr. Chen. Think about the power you have to make a real difference in the world. He reached into the envelope again and pulled out a photograph that made my blood run cold. It was Emma, leaving the library where she worked, completely unaware that she was being watched and documented by people who meant her harm. Miss Thompson seems like a lovely woman, Dimitri said casually. Very dedicated to her work, very loyal to the people she cares about. It would be tragic if anything happened to her because of decisions you make. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Cooperate, or Emma would pay the price. I felt anger rising in my chest, but forced myself to maintain the confused, frightened expression of a low-level bureaucrat who'd stumbled into something beyond his understanding. What do you want from me? I asked. Information specifically. We need to know about any security alerts or operational changes in the next 2 weeks, border patrol adjustments, surveillance targets, anything that might affect travel or movement in Southern California. 2. Whatever they were planning was scheduled for sometime in the next 14 days, and they needed to know if law enforcement was getting close to their operation. I can't just access that kind of information without raising flags, I said. There are protocols, monitoring systems. We understand. We're not asking you to do anything that would expose you unnecessarily, but you have legitimate access to these systems, Mr. Chen. Use that access carefully, and no one needs to know. Dimitri put the photographs back in the envelope and handed it to me. Study these tonight. Tomorrow evening, You'll receive instructions on how to make contact. And Mr. Chen, don't do anything foolish. We'll be watching Miss Thompson very closely." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Oh, and Michael? That's your real name, isn't it? Not the one in your personnel file, but the one your friends call you. We know more about you than you might think." The door closed behind him, leaving me alone in the men's room, with an envelope full of evidence that my cover had been blown wider than anyone at the agency had realized. They knew my real first name, which meant they had access to information that should have been classified beyond their reach. I waited 2 minutes before leaving the restroom, giving Dmitri time to exit the restaurant. When I returned to my table, the blonde server was nowhere to be seen, and Tony was back to his usual position at the hostess station. My lasagna had gone cold, but I forced myself to eat a few more bites before asking for the check. "Everything okay, Michael?" Tony asked as I paid the bill. "You look a little pale." "Just tired," I said. "Long day at work." Outside the restaurant, I walked 3 blocks in the wrong direction before doubling back toward my apartment, using reflective surfaces and traffic patterns to check for surveillance. I spotted at least 2 people following me, maintaining professional distance and using proper rotation techniques. Whether they belonged to Dimitri's organization or Martinez's teams was impossible to determine from street level. My apartment felt different when I entered, though nothing appeared to have been disturbed. It was the subtle wrongness that came from knowing your private space had been violated, that strangers had been inside, studying your life, learning your vulnerability. I sat at my kitchen table and opened Dimitri's envelope under the harsh overhead light. The surveillance photos were more extensive than he'd shown me in the restaurant. Images of my daily routines going back months, pictures of Emma and me together, shots of my family at the Golden Dragon restaurant. They'd been building a comprehensive profile, looking for pressure points and leverage opportunity. But it was the last item in the envelope that made my hands shake. A copy of my original military enlistment papers, complete with my real service record and security clearance level. Information that should have been buried so deep that no foreign intelligence service could access. Someone with high-level clearance was feeding information to Dimitri's organization. Someone inside the American intelligence community was a traitor, and they'd just handed my real identity to a terrorist cell. I walked to my secure phone and dialed Martinez's emergency number. She answered on the first ring. "Status report. We have a problem. A big one. I'm listening." They know who I am, not just the cover identity, my real military record. "Someone with access to classified personnel files is working with them." There was a long pause. "Are you certain?" They showed me my enlistment papers, Director. "Documents that are supposed to be classified above top secret. We have a mole. Get out of there. Now." Safe House Protocol 7. "What about the operation?" "The operation just changed. You're no longer bait, Michael. You're a target." I was already moving toward my bedroom, grabbing the emergency bag I'd kept packed for 2 years. "What about Emma? My family? Protection teams are being mobilized." "But Michael, if they have your real identity, they know about everyone you care about. This isn't about recruitment anymore. This is about elimination." I threw clothes into a backpack along with the emergency cash and identification I kept hidden in my bedroom safe. Through my apartment windows, I could see cars moving in the street below, more activity than was normal for a Tuesday night in downtown Riverside. "How long do I have?" I asked. "Unknown. Could be minutes, could be hours. Don't take any chances." I was heading for my front door when I heard the distinctive sound of footsteps in the hallway outside. Multiple people moving with tactical precision. Through the peephole I could see 3 figures dressed in dark clothing, weapons visible in their hands. "They're here," I whispered into the phone. "Back exit?" I moved toward my bedroom window, which opened onto the fire escape that led to the alley behind the building. But as I peered through the curtains, I saw more figures positioned in the shadows below, waiting for exactly this kind of escape attempt. Blah. "They've got the building surrounded. Defensive position. Backup is en route." I killed the lights and moved to my kitchen, where I'd hidden a Glock 19 behind the refrigerator 2 years ago. The weight of the weapon in my hands was familiar, comforting in a way that reminded me of who I really was beneath the mild-mannered cover identity. The front door exploded inward with a crash that shook the entire apartment. 3 men rushed through the opening, military-grade weapons raised, moving with the precision of professional soldiers. But they were expecting to find a frightened records clerk, not a former special forces operator with home field advantage. I put 2 rounds center mass into the first man before he'd taken 3 steps into my apartment. The second man spun toward my position, but I was already moving, using my kitchen island for cover while lining up my next shot. The third man was smarter, diving behind my couch and shouting orders in a language I didn't recognize. More footsteps thundered up the stairs outside. This wasn't a 3-man operation, this was a full assault team, and they were willing to engage in a firefight in the middle of a residential building to eliminate me. I fired twice more, keeping the survivors pinned while I considered my option. The fire escape was compromised, the front door was blocked, and I was outgunned by at least 6-1. But I had something they didn't expect: the complete architectural plans of my building memorized, including access routes that weren't visible to casual observation. The utility closet in my bedroom contained an access panel to the building's ventilation system, large enough for a person to crawl through and sophisticated enough to connect to similar systems in adjacent buildings. It was an escape route I'd prepared but never expected to use. I put 3 more rounds toward the living room to keep their heads down, then moved quickly to my bedroom. Behind me, I could hear them advancing, professional voices coordinating their assault with military efficiency. They'd been trained for urban combat, but they were operating on unfamiliar ground against an opponent who'd spent 2 years preparing for exactly this scenario. The access panel came away easily, revealing a dark shaft that led into the building's mechanical spaces. I grabbed my backpack and emergency phone, then squeezed into the opening just as I heard my bedroom door being kicked in. Crawling through ventilation ducts was exactly as uncomfortable as movies made it look, but the system connected to the adjacent office building as I'd hoped. I emerged 20 minutes later through a maintenance closet in the basement of an accounting firm, covered in dust and grateful that most office buildings had minimal security after hours. My secure phone buzzed with a text from Martinez. Status: clear of immediate danger, 3 hostiles down, unknown number still active. Rendezvous point Charlie in 60 minutes. I emerged from the office building through a service entrance that opened onto a different street, 3 blocks from my apartment. Behind me, I could hear sirens approaching. Emergency vehicles responding to reports of gunfire. The story would be on the news within hours. Federal employee attacked by unknown assailants. Possible terrorism connection under investigation. As I walked through the dark streets toward the rendezvous point, I realized that Michael Chen, records clerk, had died tonight in that apartment. Whatever identity emerged from this operation, it wouldn't be the quiet, unremarkable man who'd filed municipal documents for 2 years. The war had come home, and I was finally ready to fight it. The safe house was a nondescript ranch home in a quiet suburb 20 miles outside Riverside, the kind of place where soccer moms walked their dogs and retired couples tended their rose garden. Inside it was all business: reinforced walls, advanced communication equipment, and enough firepower to hold off a small army. Director Martinez was waiting in the kitchen when I arrived, her laptop open on the granite countertop, secure phones scattered around her like high-tech prayer beads. She looked up as I entered, taking in my dust-covered clothes and the controlled tension in my movements. 3 dead? She asked without preamble. 3 that I'm sure of. Could be more wounded. I accepted the coffee she offered, grateful for the caffeine and the routine of normal human interaction. They weren't taking prisoners, Director. This was a kill mission. We know. We intercepted their communications after you went dark. The order came from someone calling himself the architect. Voice analysis suggests he's American, possibly former military. Martinez turned her laptop screen toward me, showing a series of communication intercepts and analysis. The picture they painted was disturbing. A sophisticated operation with deep knowledge of American intelligence protocols, access to classified information, and the kind of operational security that suggested professional training. The mole? I asked. We're working on. But Michael, that's not our immediate problem. She pulled up a new file, this one containing surveillance footage from various locations around Southern California. While you were fighting for your life tonight, we cracked their operational timeline. They're moving tomorrow. The footage showed teams of operatives positioning equipment at strategic locations, highway overpasses, power substations, communication towers. Whatever they were planning, it was designed to cause maximum disruption across the entire region. Target? Multiple target. They're planning coordinated strikes on infrastructure nodes that would cripple communications and transportation across 3 counties. But that's just the opening move. Martinez clicked to the next screen, showing aerial photographs of a large industrial complex. The real target is here. I recognized the facility immediately. Riverside Energy Solutions, a natural gas processing plant that supplied fuel to most of Southern California. It was located in an industrial area outside the city, surrounded by residential neighborhoods that would be devastated if the facility was damaged. Casualty estimates, I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Conservative estimate, 15,000 dead, 50,000 injured, and that's just from the initial explosion. Long-term environmental damage could affect hundreds of thousands more. I stared at the photographs, trying to process the scope of what we were facing. This wasn't just terrorism, it was an attempt to cause catastrophic damage to American infrastructure and civilian population. The kind of attack that would fundamentally change how people lived their lives, how they viewed their safety in their own communities. How many operatives? Best estimate is 12 to 15, split into 4 teams. They've been infiltrating the area for months, establishing covers, learning the territory, professional work, probably foreign trained but with American support. The mole? Has to be. Someone's been feeding them intelligence on our capabilities, our response protocols, our personnel record. They've stayed ahead of us every step of the way. Martinez closed the laptop and looked at me directly. Michael, I'm going to be honest with you. This operation is beyond what any single agent should be asked to handle. You should be in protective custody right now, not planning to go back into the field, but you're the only one who's made contact with them. You're the only one who knows what Dimitri looks like, how they operate, how they think, and after tonight, you're the only one they'll be actively hunting. She was right, and we both knew it. Dimitri's organization had revealed their hand by trying to kill me, but they'd also created an opportunity. They thought I was dead or on the run, which meant they wouldn't expect me to show up at their operational site tomorrow. What's the plan? Officially, there is no plan. This conversation never happened, and you're not being asked to undertake any mission on behalf of the United States government. And unofficially, Martinez opened a metal briefcase that had been sitting on the kitchen counter. Inside, nestled in custom foam padding, was enough high-tech surveillance and communication equipment to stock a small intelligence operation. Unofficially, a concerned citizen with specialized training might decide to investigate suspicious activity at the Riverside Energy Solutions facility. That citizen might discover evidence of terrorist activity and alert appropriate authorities. I examined the equipment: long-range cameras, encrypted communication devices, electronic surveillance gear, and a few items that were definitely not available to civilians. Everything I'd need to infiltrate the facility and gather intelligence on the terrorist operation. Backup? Will be staged 5 miles away, ready to respond when you call it in. But Michael, once you're inside that facility, you'll be alone. We can't risk official involvement until we have proof of what they're planning. It was a deniable operation, the kind where success would be attributed to excellent intelligence work, and failure would be blamed on rogue actions by an unstable former agent. I'd run missions like this before, but never on American soil, never with my own community at risk. I'll need to contact my family first, I said. If this goes wrong tomorrow, they need to know to get out of the area. They think they're being relocated for their protection while we investigate threats against you. They'll be in a secure location in Nevada by dawn. And Emma? Martinez hesitated. She refused relocation, said she'd rather take her chances here than abandon you. I felt my chest tight. Emma Thompson, small-town librarian, was choosing to stay in a potential disaster zone rather than leave the man she'd only recently discovered was someone completely different from who she'd thought he was. Where is she now? Safe house 12 miles north of here. She's under protective surveillance, but Michael, she's been asking about you every hour since the attack on your apartment. Martinez handed me a secure phone programmed with Emma's location. You have 2 hours before you need to move into position. Use them wisely. The drive to Emma's safe house took 25 minutes through empty suburban streets. It was after midnight now, and most of Riverside was asleep, unaware that tomorrow might bring the kind of violence that would change their community forever. The safe house was a modern townhouse in a gated community, indistinguishable from dozens of others except for the subtle signs of federal protection. Too many cars parked strategically around the complex. Too many people walking dogs at odd hours. I showed my identification to the agent stationed at the front door, and was escorted to the living room where Emma was waiting. She looked up as I entered, and I saw relief flood her face. She'd changed out of her usual library attire into jeans and a sweater, but her eyes carried the exhaustion of someone who'd been running on adrenaline and worry for hours. "Michael," she said, standing and moving toward me. "Thank God you're okay." I caught her in my arms, holding her close and breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo, the normalcy of human contact after a night of violence and professional crisis. For a moment, I let myself forget about terrorists and classified operations, and simply held the woman I'd fallen in love with, under an assumed identity. "I'm okay," I said against her hair. "But Emma, we need to talk." She pulled back slightly to look at my face. "The agents told me there was an attack, that people tried to hurt you. They said you were in some kind of special government program, something like that." I led her to the couch, keeping her hands in mine. "Emma, I need you to understand something. Tomorrow is going to be dangerous, more dangerous than anything you can imagine. The people who tried to kill me tonight are planning something that could hurt a lot of innocent people, and you're going to try to stop them." It wasn't a question. She'd already figured out where this conversation was heading, already understood that the man she'd fallen in love with was someone who ran toward danger rather than away from it. "I have to. I'm the only one who can get close enough to find out what they're planning." Emma was quiet for a long moment, studying my face in the dim lamplight. "This is who you really are, isn't it? Not the quiet records clerk. Not the man who reads books while he eats dinner alone. This is the real Michael Chen. Both of those people are real. The man who fell in love with you, who looks forward to coffee dates and quiet conversations about books, that person exists. But yes, this is also who I am. Someone who risks his life to protect people he's never met. Someone who can't stand by while innocent people are threatened." She leaned against me, her head on my shoulder, and we sat in silence for several minutes. Outside I could hear the quiet sounds of suburban nighttime air conditioning units cycling on and off, the distant hum of highway traffic, the normal rhythms of a community at peace. "Will you come back?" she asked finally. "I'm going to try." "That's not the same thing." "No, it's not." Emma lifted her head to look at me again. "Michael, I need you to know something. 3 days ago I thought I was in love with a man who filed paperwork for the county. Tonight, I discovered I'm in love with someone who apparently saves the world for a living, and you know what? I'm still in love with you. Maybe even more." "Emma, let me finish. I don't understand your world and I probably never will completely, but I understand. You're someone who protects people, even when it costs you everything, even when it means your own family thinks you're a failure, even when it means lying to people you care about, even when it means putting yourself in danger." She took my hands in both of hers. "So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to wait for you to come back, however long it takes. Whatever happens, I'll be here when you're ready to come home." I wanted to tell her not to wait, that the man she'd fallen in love with might not survive tomorrow's operation. I wanted to explain that relationships with people in my profession rarely ended well, that the demands of classified work and national security made normal lives nearly impossible. Instead I kissed her, because in that moment, sitting in a federal safe house while preparing for what might be my final mission, normal felt like the most precious thing in the world. An hour later, I was driving through the pre-dawn darkness toward Riverside Energy Solutions, my equipment secured in the back seat, and my mind focused on the task ahead. The facility occupied several hundred acres in an industrial zone outside the city, its towers and processing units visible from miles away. I parked 3 blocks from the main entrance and approached on foot, using residential neighborhoods and drainage ditches to avoid the security cameras I knew would be monitoring the perimeter. The facility was designed to process and distribute natural gas to civilian populations, which meant it was heavily regulated but not heavily defended. Perfect target for someone who wanted to cause maximum damage with minimal resistance. The first sign of terrorist activity was a van parked in an industrial lot adjacent to the facility, its occupants using high-powered optics to study the plant's layout. I photographed them from a concealed position, then moved closer to the facility's eastern perimeter. What I found made my blood run cold. 3 separate teams had positioned themselves around the plant's most vulnerable points: the main processing units, the storage tanks, and the distribution hub that controlled gas flow to the entire region. They'd done their homework, identifying exactly where to place explosives for maximum destructive effect, but it was the 4th team that confirmed my worst fears. They were positioned near the facility's administration building, not planning to attack infrastructure but to take hostage. Workers would be arriving for the morning shift in 2 hours, walking into what would become a terrorist siege designed to prevent emergency response while the other teams destroyed the facility. I activated my communication equipment and sent a priority message to Martinez: confirmed terrorist operation, in progress, 4 teams, estimated 15 operatives, hostage scenario combined with infrastructure attack, request immediate tactical response. The reply came back within minutes: tactical teams moving to staging positions, do not engage until backup arrives. But as I watched the terrorists make final preparations for their attack, I realized we didn't have time to wait for backup. In 90 minutes, the facility's day shift would arrive for work. Teachers and firefighters and store clerks who had families depending on them, who had no idea they were walking into a terrorist operation. I made the decision that would define the rest of my life. Instead of waiting for official authorization, I began moving toward the administration building where the hostage team was positioned. 1 man against 4 trained terrorists wasn't good odds, but it was better than letting innocent people walk into an ambush. The first terrorist never saw me coming. I took him down silently from behind using techniques I'd learned in places whose names were still classified. The second man was more alert, but he was watching the facility's entrance, not expecting an attack from his own position. By the time the remaining 2 terrorists realized they were under assault, I'd already compromised their position and eliminated half their team. What followed was a brief, intense firefight that ended with me in control of their communication equipment and intelligence on the other 3 teams' position. I used their own radios to coordinate false information, sending the remaining teams scattered commands that disrupted their timing and exposed their locations to the federal tactical teams that were now surrounding the facility. Within 30 minutes, what should have been a coordinated terrorist attack had become a series of isolated arrests. The morning shift arrived to find their workplace swarming with federal agents and bomb disposal experts. They never knew how close they'd come to being victims of one of the most devastating terrorist attacks in American history. Later that morning, I stood in the parking lot of Riverside Energy Solutions, watching federal agents load evidence into unmarked vans. Director Martinez approached, her expression mixing relief with professional satisfaction. "Clean operation," she said. "All terrorists in custody, no civilian casualties, minimal property damage, and the mole, arrested 3 hours ago." Assistant Deputy Director James Morrison, 20-year veteran with access to personnel files and operational intelligence, he'd been feeding information to hostile organizations for at least 2 years. I remembered him from briefings, a quiet man with impeccable credentials and unquestioned loyalty. It was a reminder that in the intelligence world, the most dangerous enemies were often the ones you trusted most. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now you get to decide who you want to be." Michael Chen, records clerk, is officially dead, killed in a terrorist attack, but Michael Chen, intelligence operative, has a choice to make. She handed me a folder containing new identity documents and official reinstatement paper. "You can come back to active duty, full honors, acknowledgement of your service, or you can disappear, new identity, new life, federal pension, and our gratitude." I thought about the choice while watching the sun rise over the industrial facility that had almost become ground zero for a terrorist attack. 2 years ago I'd accepted a cover assignment that required me to become someone unremarkable, someone forgettable. Last night, I'd rediscovered who I really was underneath all the pretense. "There's a third option," I said finally. "I'm listening. I stay Michael Chen, but not the clerk, and not the operative. I become someone new, someone who can live in both worlds without having to choose between them." Martinez smiled. "And what would this new Michael Chen do for a living?" "Private security consulting, corporate intelligence, the kind of work that lets me use my skills to help people without having to maintain classified cover identities." "Interesting." "And this new Michael Chen, Would he have room in his life for a certain librarian? I thought about Emma waiting in a safe house, choosing to love someone whose real life she was only beginning to understand. He'd better. She's the best thing that ever happened to any version of Michael Chen. 6 months later, I stood in the backyard of the house Emma and I had bought together, watching my father work the grill while my mother fussed over place settings for our housewarming party. The Golden Dragon had catered the event, and the entire neighborhood had turned out to welcome the new residents. You know, my father said, flipping burgers with the concentration he usually reserved for restaurant inventory, I owe you an apology, Dad. We've been through that. No, let me say it. For 2 years I thought you'd given up, thought you'd settled for mediocrity. I was wrong about what you were doing, but I was more wrong about who you are. He set down his spatula and looked at me directly. You're the son I always wanted you to be. I just didn't have the sense to see it. Across the yard, Emma was showing my mother the herb garden we'd planted together, pointing out the basil and oregano that would remind her of the Golden Dragon's kitchen. Jessica and Thomas were playing cornhole with some of our neighbors, and for the first time in years, my sister looked at me with something approaching respect. David Park from my old office had even come to the party, still incredulous about the double life his former cubicle neighbor had been living. I always thought you were too quiet to be interesting, he'd told me earlier. Turns out you were too interesting to be loud. As the sun set over our new neighborhood, I realized I'd finally found the balance I'd been looking for. I was still Michael Chen, but now I was all of Michael Chen, the protector, the son, the partner, the professional. No more hiding, no more compartmentalization, no more choosing between duty and love. My phone buzzed with a text from Martinez. New case, if you're interested, corporate espionage, possible foreign involvement, your kind of work. I looked around the backyard at the people who mattered most to me, at the life I'd built by choosing authenticity over secrecy, and typed back, send me the details. Emma appeared at my side, slipping her hand into mine. She asked, having learned to recognize the expression I got when the world called. Maybe, would you mind? She smiled, the same smile that had captivated me in a coffee shop when I was pretending to be someone I wasn't. As long as you come home to me, always, I said, and meant. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.